Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum, dear students. In this session, we are going to discuss paralinguistic communication and sociolinguistics. I hope and expect by the end of this session, you would be able to understand the definition of paralinguistic communication, and you would also be able to place the significance of paralinguistic communication in different sociolinguistic contexts. Well, my dear students, to start with what paralinguistic communication is, I would say it is the study of voice and how words are used or how words are said or how they are pronounced. In fact, paralinguistic signals are cues that refer to every element and nuance of your speech. Well, at the outset, I think it would be a good idea to refreshen our understanding that there are three main levels of communication: linguistic, paralinguistic, and extralinguistic. Whereas linguistic level of communication purely deals with language itself, the language choices and the structures of language, etc. And the non-linguistic, the third one, the third extreme level deals with the elements that are not related to language, rather that are related to, for other elements in the setting. For example, the gestures, the body movements, etc. This paralinguistic part I would place somewhere in between the other two. This comes in the center because this is not the linguistic part, but this deals with the performance of the linguistic part, I would say. That is how do we perform language, how do we pronounce language, what kind of voice, for example, is used for that purpose. Anyways, paralinguistic signals, they serve as very important clues in the process of meaning making. In fact, it is the study of vocal and sometimes non-vocal signals beyond the basic verbal messages of a speech. They are also known as vocalics in linguistics or in sociolinguistics. Paralinguistics sets great store on how something is said, not on what is said. So, what is said is the language part of it. So, for example, when in a classroom, for example, when the students are doing some activity and a student is not performing very well, is not doing so good, but the teacher says, "Oh, you are doing great." So, the language itself, what is said is, if we just simply interpret that is, an appreciation. But actually in that context, when the teacher is actually not appreciating, is rather being sarcastic, that is conveyed through what? That is conveyed through the tone, the choice of the pitch that is used, and the stress, unstress of the words. So, it includes speech characteristics that also fall outside of the spoken word. What do I mean by this? All right, inside the boundary of the spoken words, the pitch, the intonation, the stress, the unstress, the accent in total, etc. Yes, this is what we understand is paralinguistics. But when we say outside the boundaries of language, what does that mean? All right, think of a situation where somebody, while speaking, produces certain sounds. For example, oh, etc. Now, these are not part of language as per se, but the choice of and the use of all these kind of sounds, how they're inserted in the utterances, they affect the meaning-making process, and actually the whole meaning of communication changes because of that. It can, in fact, modify the total meaning. For example, if somebody is constantly, while saying something, is showing hesitations in language. For example, if let me give you an example. For example, I really don't think so. This etc. that I have placed in this utterance, they show clearly the hesitation of the person, the reluctance of the person who is speaking that, which conveys a kind of meaning to the other interlocutor or other interlocutors in the interaction or conversation. So, The process of paralinguistic communication includes accent, pitch of voice, volume. How high is the volume? How low is the volume when you are speaking? What is the speech rate? Are you going speedy or you are slow in pronouncing, words? Modulation, fluency, are you very fluent or not? So, the boundaries of paralanguage, according to Peter Matthews, are unavoidably imprecise. They're not precise. You can not say that these are just a few things that would add into that. There are so many dimensions of each of these aspects of what we call paralinguistics. We speak with our vocal organs, but we converse with our entire body. This is what he also believes in. So, my dear students, paralinguistic phenomena occur alongside spoken language, interact with it. It works alongside the linguistic phenomena and thus produces in togetherness with the linguistic phenomena, the total system of communication. Well, my dear students, there is a general cliche, there is a general saying that language is what you say and paralanguage is how it is said. However, this can be misleading because actually sometimes paralanguage is not only how it is said, it is also what is said. Because through the tone of our voice, sometimes moms and dads, they talk to their children in a certain tone in the presence, for example, of a guest, that the tone conveys the meaning. So what is said is also, a paralinguistic aspect sometimes. I would give you some examples from different cultures, how paralinguistic features are used. I'm going to give you the example of Saudi culture. Well, in Saudi culture, when there is a group of people who are talking to each other, in the interaction, if the people are of the same age group and of the same social status, they are equals, they would use a comparatively louder pitch of voice for conversations. Whereas, if you compare this to the USA culture, with the same other parameters of the same age and same social class, etc., when people are talking in a group, if they get loud in that is considered to be objectionable and that is not considered to be very desirable. Now, actually, this idea of using loudness in different contexts, it connotes different meanings in different contexts. In the Saudi culture, it connotes strength and sincerity amongst Arabs. And using a soft tone in their context would mean weakness. On the other hand, when you compare it with the US culture, it does not connote strength. It is considered to be impolite. Personal status also modulates voice tone. You change your tone, you set your tone according to the status. So lower class people, for example, would lower their voices when they would be talking to people from the upper class. So, for example, in Saudi Arabia, when somebody shows respect to, for example, an American, so the Saudi person would lower the voice. This lowering the voice in Saudi culture would be showing respect. There are other, paralinguistic features as well. I would just give you an example of a comparison of Japanese and Pakistani cultures. In Pakistani culture, when two people are communicating, one of the important features of this paralinguistic aspect of language is, how do you give pauses? Do you speak non-stop? Do you take pauses when you speak? What are the length of those pauses that you take, etc.? So when we compare the Japanese and the Pakistani culture, a Japanese would listen to the other interlocutor in the conversation with a lot of patience and would wait for that person to give a pause. And when that person would give a pause, the other person would take up and would continue the conversation, would take the floor for conversation. Whereas in Pakistani culture, unfortunately, we are slightly impatient in that. which results in interruptions, which results in kind of overlappings, where one person is still speaking and we start speaking, the other person starts speaking. And also, the pauses that are taken in between one utterance and the other utterance. In Pakistani culture, they are comparatively very shorter as compared to the Japanese culture. Another aspect of this paralinguistic communication is tone. The more technical discussion of what is loosely described as tone of voice involves the recognition of a whole set of variations that we create during our conversation as dynamic features of, voice control, I would say. So tone includes loudness, tempo, pitch, fluctuation, continuity, etc. And by the way, when you go to a new culture, for example, it is your tone of voice that also makes you distinct in terms of being a foreigner or a stranger in that context. In short, what I would say is that in our everyday conversations, in our everyday interactions and the use of language, this is a general observation that human beings use, alongside the linguistic and non-linguistic features of language, they use paralinguistic features to make the meaning-making process easy and possible in different social contexts.